Hello everyone, this is Navid Madani, and today I'm going to present to you a method to analyze multiple social identities in Twitter bios. So what is an identity? An identity is a word or phrase that people use to label each other or themselves. So why is this important for us, and why do we want to measure it? Because they hold people accountable for the labels they assign to themselves or each other. And based on social identity theory, it is the motivation behind a person's behaviors and actions. But the thing is that measuring identity is really hard. So, historically, social scientists have made two critical assumptions about what a social identity is. They assume that we know in prior the possible words and phrases that people use to describe themselves, and that these phrases are actually aligned with the definition of social identity. But as we look at social media, this is simply not the case, and people tend to do this in more complex ways. So, for example, we know that Republican is an identity. But what about the time that a user says that he is MAGA-minded? This is not available in prior lists of identities, and it is also not aligned with current definition of social identity. But still, it holds very important information which shows the political affiliation of the person. So, in our work, in many iterations of qualitative coding, we propose a new concept to characterize how social identity is expressed in language. This definition, we believe, that better encapsulates the many ways that people express themselves on their Twitter bios. And we observe that people tend to do this in four broad ways. First, they tend to use preferences. For example, people might say they're basketball lovers instead of saying a basketball player. Or they might say, for example, they writing is their life instead of saying that they are a writer. Or for example, second, they might use personal descriptors. They might say they're calm, humble, patient, and etc. Also, as we saw earlier, they might use affiliations. They might use phrases such as mega-minded to refer to their, for example, political affiliation instead of saying they are a Republican. And also they can use actions instead of saying, for example, they are a football player, they might say I play football. So we come up with this definition of personal identifier, which is a word or phrase which, when read, can be used to make a direct assumption about a social identity held by an individual. So our method is simple. We first split the bio using manually constructed lists of delimiters and lots of regular expressions. Then we clean each phrase using regular expressions again, and we filter out phrases that are unlikely to be personal identifier, such as URL, emails, or etc. For example, for this Twitter bio, we come up with personal identifiers such as writer, artist, author, and musician. So to validate our work, we use this dataset. Our dataset, a portion of our dataset is linked to voter registrations record, which means that for users in that dataset, we have the demographic information of them. For example, we know their race, their gender, the average of rural area that they're living in, and some other demographic information. So we propose 5 methods of validation, which we will go over some of them now. So first, we show that our method is reliable. To do that, the authors of this paper try to label the phrases that the algorithm extracts into being either a personal identifier or not, based on the definition that we came up with. So we observed that for phrases that consist of 1, 2, and 3 token, regardless of the number of bios that they appear in. Our algorithm is actually providing a good accuracy to specify personal identifiers. But for 4 and more tokens, the performance of algorithm drops, and we concluded to omit those phrases from our algorithm's output. Also, we report the creepiness alpha as a measure of our interpreter reliability score in annotation, which is a promising score between 0.63 to 0.72 between the authors of this paper. Also, by calculating the log odds of each personal identifier appearing in each of the demographic dimensions, we show that the algorithm is actually extracting meaningful and useful constructs. So, for example, in the dimension of gender, we observe that these personal identifiers that the algorithm extracted are completely aligned with the gender female, and these are completely aligned with the gender of male. We also, for example, observe that farmer's wife, cattleman, farm wife, rancher, and such phrases appear in profile bio of people who are living in rural areas. This shows that personal identifiers are actually meaningful constructs and are aligned with these dimensions of social life, and they can be used to address many downstream research questions. We also show that our algorithm picks phrases that express the self in more complicated ways. For example, we observe that along political party, Republicans tend to express themselves using phrases that are highly related to constitutes of family or religion. And Democrats, for example, are using phrases and words that, for example, refer to racial justice, like Black Lives Matter, or phrases such as pronouns, using pronouns to define the gender or being non-binary, or etc. For example, they use him, her, she, or such pronouns in their profile bios, which consists of really important information about these people. And this is why we think that this work can really help us in recognizing and understanding the values and ideology of supporters and opponents of many social movements that are happening on social media. So the main takeaways of this paper is that first, we present the definition of personal identifier by performing multiple rounds of qualitative coding, which you can go over the details in the paper. Also, personal identifiers, we show that they are meaningful constructs. They can be used to address many downstream research questions. And also the code for extracting these personal identifiers is accessible to public in this GitHub repo. And I'm here if you have any questions, and please shoot me an email in this address. Thank you for listening.